The smoke came first. It always did. Late October of 1983, and the whole valley west of Pendleton, Oregon was hazed over by sundown. Every wheat farmer for 40 miles was burning his stubble. That was how it was done. That was how it had always been done. Wendell Krieger stood at the edge of his north field, watching his neighbor's flames cross the fence line. He was 50, had been farming the same 320 acres in Umatilla County since 1952. 31 harvests, 31 stubble burns, every single year the same. This year would be different. He had already decided. The match was still in his shirt pocket. He hadn't lit it. The wind was coming from the southwest at maybe 8 miles an hour, which was good burning weather. The stubble was dry. The fire lines were cut. Everything was ready. He stood there until full dark, watching the orange line move east across Carl Henderson's place, and then he walked back to the house. His boots were heavy with the dust of the field. Marlene was at the kitchen sink. She asked if he'd burned. He told her no. She didn't ask why, didn't need to. She'd lived with him for 34 years and knew when a thing was being thought through. She put a plate of meatloaf in front of him, sat across the table with her own. They ate without talking. The smell of his neighbor's smoke came through the kitchen screen door. The next morning he went to the equipment shed. The old John Deere 4020 was sitting where it had sat since September. He pulled the tarp back, ran his hand along the moldboard plow attached to the three-point hip. The plow was a 1968 model, bought used in 1971 for $340. Still ran, still cut clean. The paint was faded to a chalky green. The handles were worn smooth. He'd put thousands of acres through it. What Wendell intended to do had a name. He didn't know the name yet. The name was conservation tillage, though the term wouldn't reach Umatilla County in any practical way for another 6 years. What Wendell knew was simpler. He knew the smoke from the burns thinned his topsoil. He knew the wind came hard off the Blue Mountains every spring and took the dust with it. He knew his grandfather had told him in 1948 that the land was tired and getting tireder. His grandfather had been 71 when he said it. Sitting on the porch of the same house Wendell now lived in, the old man had pointed at the south field and told Wendell, who was 23 at the time, that they'd been taking from that ground for 2 generations and putting nothing back but ash. Ash wasn't enough. Hadn't been for a while. The grandfather died in 1953, the year after Wendell took. For 30 years, Wendell had burned anyway. That was what the neighbors did. That was what his father had done. He just didn't know what else to do about it. Until he did. The idea had come slow. 3 years slow. It started in the spring of 1981, when he'd helped his cousin Lloyd clean out a barn in Walla Walla. Lloyd had inherited the place from an uncle who died. Behind the barn was a compost pile the uncle had been turning for 41 years. Wendell stuck a shovel in it. The soil came up black, spongy, held water like a wrung sponge would let go of it. Lloyd's uncle had grown tomatoes the size of grapefruits in that soil, without irrigation, in dry country. The uncle had also grown potatoes, beans, sweet corn, and squash, all in that same hot-tempered Walla Walla ground that broke the back of every farmer who pushed it too hard. The uncle hadn't pushed it. He'd fed it. 41 years of feeding. Wendell had thought about that pile every day for 2.5 years. The principle was straightforward. Plant material given to soil becomes soil. Burned plant material becomes ash, and the smoke goes east toward Idaho. The ash washes away with the first rain. What stays behind is less than what you started with. Multiply that by 30 years of burning, by 60 years if you counted his father's tenure too, by 80 if you counted his grandfather's. That was a lot of subtraction. So he wouldn't burn. On November 3, 1983, he started plowing, not deep, just enough to turn the wheat stubble under and bury it in contact with the soil. The field was 84 acres. The 40-20 pulled the plow at 4 miles per hour. He worked from sunrise to sunset for 9 days, ate his lunch in the cab. Marlene brought him a thermos of coffee at noon and again at 4. The coffee was hot when she brought it, lukewarm by the time he stopped to drink it. The temperature dropped through that week. Started at 51 degrees on November 3rd, was down to 28 by November 11th. The ground was getting hard. Wendell finished the last 6 rows in the freezing fog of November 12th. Couldn't see the end of the field from the start of it. Just kept the tractor on a line and trusted his sense of where the fence was. Carl Henderson drove past on the 4th day, slowed his truck, watched for a minute, drove on. By the 7th day, 3 other farmers had driven past. 2 stopped. Neither got out. One of them was Dale Briscoe, who'd been farming the section east of Wendell's place since 1959. Dale rolled his window down, asked Wendell if his burn permit had been denied. Wendell told him no. Dale waited for more. Wendell didn't offer more. Dale drove off. That was the start of it. The talking. It moved through the county the way talk moves through farm country. Slow, indirect, at the feed store, at the Methodist church on Sunday morning, at the diner on Cottonwood Road where the older farmers had coffee at 6 a.m. Wendell Krieger isn't burning. Wendell Krieger is plowing his stubble under. Why? The answer most of them settled on was that Wendell was getting old. 60 was coming up fast. His son had moved to Portland in 1978 to work for an insurance company. There was no one to take over the farm. Maybe Wendell had given up. Maybe he was just turning dirt to look busy. Maybe Marlene had been after him for years to slow down, and this was how he was stalling, making work that didn't matter. None of them came to ask him directly. That wasn't how it was done. The county extension agent stopped by the house on December 12th. His name was Robert Pellman. He was 34 years old, had a degree in agronomy from Oregon State. Had been the Umatilla County agent for. He drove a state-issued white Chevy Caprice with the Oregon State seal on the door. He arrived at 1:30 p.m. Marlene let him into the kitchen. Made him a cup of coffee in the same pot she used for Wendell. Pellman had a manila folder. Inside the folder were 2 pages of typed notes and a 4-page pamphlet titled Stubble Management for the Columbia Plateau, published by the Oregon State University Extension Service in 1981. He laid it all on the kitchen table. He told Wendell, sitting at that kitchen table over a cup of Marlene's coffee, that burning stubble was standard practice for killed weed seeds, killed fungal pathogens, returned potash to the soil quickly. Plowing it under, he said, would tie up nitrogen for a full growing season. Wendell's yield, he predicted, would drop by 30% at minimum, maybe more. He showed Wendell the numbers in the pamphlet. Page 3. A table of expected nitrogen immobilization in different residue scenarios. The math was real. Wendell didn't argue with it. Pellman finished his coffee. Asked if Wendell had any questions. Wendell told him he didn't. Pellman set the pamphlet on the kitchen table. Said he'd be available if Wendell wanted to reconsider before spring planting. Said the burn permit window was still open for another 3 weeks. Said it'd be better to burn late than to plant into nitrogen-starved. Wendell thanked him for stopping by. Set the pamphlet at the edge of the table. Pellman left at 2:45 p.m. The pamphlet sat on that table for 6 weeks before Marlene moved it to a drawer. Wendell had no answer to the nitrogen problem. He knew Pellman was probably right about that part. Decomposing wheat straw pulled nitrogen out of the soil while the microbes worked on it. Standard chemistry couldn't be argued with. What Wendell could do was add nitrogen back. He went to the co-op in Pendleton on March 2, 1984, talked to a man named Eldon Schaffer at the fertilizer counter. Eldon had sold fertilizer in Umatilla County for 22 years, knew every farmer by name, knew Wendell's account number from memory. Wendell told him he wanted 3 tons of ammonium nitrate. Eldon asked what for. Wendell told him for the north field. Eldon paused, looked at him, asked if he was sure. Wendell said he was sure. Eldon wrote up the order. 3 tons at $186 a ton, $558 total. Delivered to the farm on March 8th. Wendell spread it himself with a pull-type broadcast spreader behind the 40-20, 80 pounds per acre across the 84 acres. The work took 2 days. The wind was light. The nitrate went where it was supposed to go. Then, he disked everything in. 2 passes with a tandem disc, set shallow at 3 inches. The buried stubble was already breaking down. He could see the dark color of the soil where the residue was rotting. Could smell it too. A faint, sour smell like an old hayloft after rain. He'd never paid attention to that smell before. He paid attention now. Then he drilled the spring wheat on March 22nd. A variety called Stevens, soft white winter wheat that did fine as a spring crop in the Columbia Basin. 90 pounds of seed per acre. Drilled at 1 1/4 inch depth. The drill was an old John Deere 8300, 18-foot, hopper full. Marlene didn't ask what the year's expenses were running to. Wendell didn't volunteer. He'd already spent more than he would have on a normal year by about $700. The fuel alone for 9 days of plowing had cost him $94 at $1.12 a gallon for diesel. The ammonium nitrate was the bigger hit. He'd also bought a new disc gang bolt for $11 and replaced a hydraulic hose for $27. Small things. They added up. If the yield came in below average, he'd have lost money for the year. Real money, not just opportunity cost. Cash money. He didn't talk about that with Marlene. She didn't ask. They'd been at this long enough to know. The wheat came up on April 4th. Even germination. Good stand count. He walked the field in the morning of April 5th and counted plants in a square foot at 6 different spots. Average came to 22 plants per square foot. The target was 20. He was just above. By April 18th, the field was 4 inches tall. Dark green. As dark as any wheat he'd ever grown. The ammonium nitrate had done its work. The buried stubble had not, as Pellman warned, locked up everything green. Something was happening down there. He didn't know exactly what. The texture of the dirt was different. When he scuffed it with his boot, it crumbled. Didn't pack into the clods he was used to. By mid-May, the talk in the county had shifted. People driving past the Krieger place could see the field. It looked like every other field, maybe a little darker in color, maybe slightly thicker on the ground, but not obviously different. Not the disaster the extension agent had predicted. The men at the diner on Cottonwood Road stopped mentioning it as often. There wasn't a story to tell. Yet, Carl Henderson, the neighbor whose burn Wendell had watched on that October night, came over on the 3rd Sunday in May. Carl was 61, had farmed the adjoining 280 acres since 1954. Their fathers had farmed next to each other before them. He didn't come to talk about the field. He came to borrow a hydraulic cylinder for his swather. They stood in the equipment shed for 20 minutes. Carl mentioned the weather, mentioned the price of wheat futures had ticked up to $3.65, didn't mention the unburned field. But on his way out, Carl walked the long way around, past the north field. Stopped at the fence. Looked at the wheat for maybe 3 minutes. Pulled a single head off a stem near the fence line, even though it was still green and too early to tell anything. Crushed it between his fingers, threw it down, got in his truck and drove off. Wendell saw him from the shed door. Didn't say anything. Marlene saw it too from the kitchen window. She told Wendell at supper that Carl had stopped at the fence. Wendell said he knew. They ate the rest of the meal in silence. The summer of 1984 was dry, drier than usual. The Pendleton area got 2 inches of rain between April and August. The 30-year average was 6.8. Most fields in Umatilla County started showing stress by late June. Yellowing at the tips. Stunted heads. Shortened internodes. The farmers who'd burned in October and worked their soil clean were watching their topsoil blow away every time the wind came off the blues. On a bad afternoon in early July, Wendell stood on the porch and watched a brown haze move across Carl Henderson's place. Topsoil, lifting and going east. His own field stayed put. The dirt held. The buried stubble had given the soil something to grip with. The wheat heads filled out through July. The kernels developed. Wendell pulled samples and chewed on the kernels every few days. They were firm. Plump, he knew what good wheat felt like in his teeth. This was good wheat. His own field held. The plowed-in stubble, breaking down through the spring, had become organic matter. The organic matter held moisture the way Lloyd's uncle's compost pile had held moisture. Not a lot more, but more. Enough. Harvest came in the first week of August. Wendell ran the combine himself. The same combine he'd run for 14 years. A Massey Ferguson 750 he'd bought used in 1970. He started on the south end of the north field on August 6th at 9 a.m. Worked until 7 p.m. Did the same the next day. And the next. By the third day he knew. The hopper was filling faster than it should have been. He had to dump into the truck more often. The truck was making more trips to the elevator than usual. The man at the elevator, Bert Yoder, who'd been weighing trucks in Pendleton for 18 years, mentioned on the second day that Wendell was running heavy. Wendell didn't say anything to that. When the truck weighed in at the elevator in Pendleton, the scale read what Wendell had not expected. He'd expected average, maybe slightly above average if he was lucky. The county average that year, in that drought, was 38 bushels per acre. Wendell's 84 acres averaged 71. 71 bushels per acre, almost double, in a drought year. He didn't say anything to the elevator man. Took the receipt, drove home, set it on the kitchen table next to a salt shaker. Marlene picked it up, read it, set it back down, asked him if it was correct. He told her he'd run the numbers twice on the way home. It was correct. She didn't say anything else. Made him a sandwich. He ate it standing by the window. The talk in the county did not start immediately. The talk took until September, when the harvest receipts had all been totaled and the co-op published the area averages in the weekly bulletin. The bulletin came out on Wednesday, September 19th, 1984. Wendell's totals were in there. Anonymous. By field number. But people knew which field was which. The farmers in the diner on Cottonwood Road could read a field number off a bulletin and tell you whose place it was. By Friday, the phone at the Krieger house rang 4 times. 3 farmers asking about the field. 1 reporter from the East Oregonian asking the same. Wendell told the reporter he wasn't interested in being in the paper. Told the farmers what he'd done. 6 inches of plowing. 80 pounds of ammonium nitrate per acre. Spring wheat drilled March 22nd. That was all of it. There wasn't anything else to tell. 2 of the farmers said they'd think about trying it. 1 of them did. The other forgot about it by spring. The one who tried it was Dale Briscoe. The same Dale Briscoe who'd asked Wendell in November of 1983 if his burn permit had been denied. Dale plowed under 60 acres of his stubble in the fall of 1984. Came over to Wendell's shed 3 times that winter to ask questions. Wendell answered each one, didn't add anything, didn't recruit. Told Dale about the nitrogen, told him about the disc settings, told him to drill in the spring instead of the fall. Dale wrote it all down in a small notebook he kept in his shirt pocket. Dale's yield in 1985 was 64 bushels per acre. The county average that year was 44. Dale never burned stubble again. Farmed for another 19 years and not a single fall burn after the autumn of 1983. Robert Pellman, the extension agent who'd predicted a 30% drop, never came back to the Krieger place. He saw Wendell once at the co-op in October of 1984. They were both in the line for the cashier. Wendell nodded back. Neither said anything. Pellman transferred to a position in Salem in 1986. The pamphlet recommending burning was revised by Oregon State in 1991. The 1991 version included a section on the benefits of incorporating residue into the soil. Wendell read it at the feed store. Didn't buy a copy. Didn't need to. Carl Henderson kept burning until 1989. The fall of that year, his daughter, who'd taken an agriculture class at community college in La Grande, told him he should stop. He stopped. Came over to ask Wendell about it in the fall of 1990. Stood in the equipment shed where they'd talked 7 years earlier about the borrowed hydraulic cylinder. Wendell told him the same things he'd told Dale Briscoe 6 years earlier. 6 inches ammonium nitrate. Spring drilling. That was all. Carl said he wished he'd asked sooner. Wendell told him it was easier the way it had happened. People had to come to it. Telling them didn't work. He'd known that in 1983, and that was why he hadn't told anyone. Just plowed his field and let them watch. Carl stood there for a long time. Looked at the old 40-20 in the corner of the shed. Looked at the moldboard plow, still didn't say anything else. Drove home. Wendell farmed the 320 acres until 1997. Quit at 72. The land went to a neighbor's grandson named Ethan Olmsted, who'd come back from college in Pullman wanting to farm. The grandson was 24, smart enough to listen. Wendell spent the better part of 2 months in the fall of 1996 walking the fields with him, showing him where the rocks were, where the wet spots came up in spring, where the deer crossed in November. Showed him the equipment, showed him the records, showed him the plow. The grandson kept the practice going, plowed under every harvest stubble, added nitrogen, drilled in spring. The numbers Wendell tracked over 14 seasons of the method, from 1984 to 1997, average yield of 67 bushels per acre. The Umatilla County average over the same 14 years, 47. 20 bushels higher, every year. At a wheat price that averaged $3.40 a bushel over that period, the difference was $68 per acre. Across 84 acres, that was $5,712 more per year than his neighbors. Across 14 years, $79,968. From not lighting a match. The savings on burn permits and on the labor of running fire lines added another $400 a year. The savings on lost topsoil could not be calculated but were real. The Krieger soil, tested in 1996 at the request of an Oregon State soil scientist who'd heard about the place, had organic matter content of 3.8%. The county average was 1.4. The neighbors who'd burned for 40 years were farming dirt that was barely above mineral. The soil scientist's name was Dr. Lena Marsh. She drove up from Corvallis with 2 graduate students in a state truck. Spent a day taking core samples at 12 points across the 320 acres. Sent the results to Wendell by mail 6. The cover letter said the field had organic matter levels consistent with grassland conversion, not cultivated wheat ground. She asked if she could publish the results in a journal article. Wendell said yes, but asked that his name not be in it. She honored that. The paper, when it came out in the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation in 1990, referenced only a 320-acre commercial wheat operation in Umatilla County, Oregon. Wendell read the paper once, folded it, put it in the same drawer as the 1981 burning pamphlet. Wendell died in 2011. He was 86. Marlene followed him in 2014. The farm is still farmed by Ethan Olmsted, now in his 50s. The 4020 is still in the equipment shed. The moldboard plow is still attached to it. Both still work. Ethan uses them every fall. He's added a no-till drill and some newer equipment over the years, but the old plow still gets pulled out for certain fields. He says it does something the new equipment doesn't do. Doesn't try to explain it past that. He drove the rounds of the North Field in October of 2023. Plowed in the stubble the way Wendell had shown him in 1996 and 19. Across the fence, Carl Henderson's grandson was doing the same. So was Dale Briscoe's son. Nobody in that stretch of Umatilla County burns stubble anymore. Hasn't for years. The smoke that used to hang over the valley every October is gone. Has been gone for a generation. Younger farmers in the area don't even know it used. They think the air over Pendleton in October always looked like this. It went away because one man didn't light a match. That was all. He just didn't light it. The rest followed.